Draft Mechanic is a proud member of Punchboard Media. Pull up a chair at punchboardmedia.com. Draft Mechanic, Episode 73.
On this episode of Draft Mechanic, we discuss recent plays of Blight Chronicles Agent Decker, Las Vegas Boulevard, Monster Match, and Funky Chicken. We've got a 6-pack review of Rising 5 Runes of Astros. We put Monster Match on tap. I talk about the history of cider, and in our final round we asked our Slack channel what constitutes a modern classic to them. So sit back, relax, grab a pint, and enjoy the show.
You've seen the future and it works to take a mile. The bit all is for the best in the best of our world.
Hello and welcome back to another episode of Draft Mechanic. I'm Jake.
And I'm Danielle.
And Draft Mechanic is the podcast about board games and craft beer and anything we can do to tie the two together.
Here at Draft Mechanic, we like our beer like we like our board games.
Straight off the presses.
Because it's new games and also it's cider.
Yes.
You get it?
Pressing, cider. It's a very important issue we have to talk about today. Also, when we discuss modern classics in our final round, that's also pressing. See, I found a way to tie it all together. I'm very proud.
You've done that.
Hey, everybody. Welcome back to another episode. Obviously, we are Draft Mechanic, the board games and craft beer podcast. If this is your first episode, thank you so much for joining us today. And if you are a returning listener, we super duper appreciate it. If you're looking for us on the internet, draftmechanic.net is the website. At Draft Mechanic on your favorite social media, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter are the ones that we are on.
We've also got a Board Game Geek Guild. That is guild number 2470. If you head over there, there will be a thread for this episode and every episode. So if you want to give us your 2 cents on what we've been talking about, that would be a great place to do it.
We'd also love to We'd also love to invite you to our Slack channel. You can join draftmechanic.net/Slack and come and talk with us and other Draft Mechanic listeners, as well as where we get the feedback for our final round at the end of the episode. Also, we are a member of Punchboard Media, punchboardmedia.com, to go check out all the other awesome audio, written, and video board game media contributors that we have.
Finally, if you happen to be in the Charlotte, North Carolina area, we do twice a month meetups. The next one is going to be on Thursday, May 3rd at Good Road Cider Works, where they sell many fine ciders. After that, we will have on the third Tuesday of the month a meetup at Salud Cerveceria, but if you are going to be in town at the beginning of May 3rd, Good Road Cider Works, we'd love to see you come out, play some games, drink some excellent beverages.
Awesome. So, on to the news. First up, Gen Con has released the initial events schedule for Gen Con 51 that takes place August 2nd through 5th in Indianapolis this year. Event registration itself will be available on May 6th, but at least you got some time, a few weeks, to go in there and start digging around for events you might find interesting.
And Gen Con does do that wish list submission where you're able to take events and put them onto your wish list and then submit it to see what you can get tickets for right away. So it's good to, take a pass through that before the day of submission so you can start building and creating your cool spreadsheet schedule if you're anything like me.
Yeah, it just went up earlier today, so it's not like we've had a chance to really dig through it. I kind of just typed a few random game names in there. I might, I guess for the third consecutive year, I might attempt to do a Star Trek Ascendancy session where I get in there and play the game and play some of the new expansion packs. But if any prior experience shows true, I will probably not actually do those things.
And of course, this is not the cutoff for people to register events, so if you do your wish list now, there is a great possibility that some of the things you might want to do will be added to the event schedule farther down the road as we get anywhere remotely close to Gen Con. So if you don't see something on that list that you were hoping might be there, just wait a little while. They might just be late putting their events in.
It is kind of crazy how far in advance we are thinking about Gen Con every year. It really feels like maybe there's 3 or 4 months off that Gen Con isn't on the radar, or some major deadline for that convention is coming up in the next few weeks. Maybe it's just, the way that thing has grown so big at this point, but it's a lot. There's a lot going on, and there's tons and tons and tons of stuff in that event catalog already. It's almost becoming kind of impossible to sort through or dig through in any way.
Becoming.
Yeah, true. It's been that way for a little while. But, one thing I do enjoy is that the website is easy enough to type in a few words and get an idea of what kind of events there might be. And maybe, just maybe, I'll go play Star Trek Ascendancy this year. Maybe.
I will give them credit. Events are one of the few types of things that actually works on their mobile website. You can actually look at the event schedule.
Yes, and I guess by next time we record, we will have at least looked at it a little bit and maybe know some cool events to point out to people. Maybe. I don't know. Okay, on to news story number 2. This one involves Asmodee. What a surprise. We kind of continue to loop back to Asmodee, mainly because they own like 98% of the board game world, or at least it seems that way sometimes.
Hey, this story's not a bad one for once, so let's just talk about the cool news item.
They didn't purchase any other companies in this news story. Although, I guess they probably did have to buy a number of publishers to get here. But anyway, Asmodee is creating a new selection of great board games called Modern Classics, which is, I guess, basically going to just be a designation on the boxes, another little label there in the corner to signify that they're part of this group. And from their press release, Modern Classics refers to a small group of pioneering titles that have left a lasting legacy on the board games market and have stood the test of time to remain preferred gateway purchases in a constantly changing landscape of products. Modern Classics are an essential part of any games collection, representing benchmarks in gameplay, design, and replayability that have inspired many other titles. They appeal to all levels of players, whether they are looking for a casual family game or to test their skills against seasoned veterans. So, funnily enough, it seems that they've put together a 6-pack of games for this Asmodee Modern Classics group. And real quick, this is the Asmodee UK imprint, not the Asmodee North America or Asmodee, the parent company. I don't know why specifically Asmodee UK is the one doing this, but here it is. Ticket to Ride Europe, Catan, Carcassonne, Dixit, Pandemic, and Splendor. I feel like I would have a hard time arguing against any of those titles, but it is kind of interesting to look back over the last few years of Asmodee acquisitions, and you look at this and see, okay, Catan is something they purchased from somebody. Pandemic came in with the Z-Man acquisition. Splendor, I guess, is a homegrown title with Space Cowboys.
Yeah, but Ticket to Ride Europe is from Days of Wonder.
Yeah.
I'm really glad they included Ticket to Ride Europe, by the way, because it does add a couple of new, really interesting mechanics that make it a preferable game over Ticket to Ride America, at least in my opinion.
Yeah, I can agree with that. But it's an interesting collection because I at first looked at this and I expected to be just kind of like, oh, this is going to be just lip service to themselves. But it is a really good collection of games.
Yeah, I would argue with the point that they are required in any game collection. I feel like if you need a lot of gateway games, these are a wide variety of gateway games that would be good places to start. But if you're maybe a gamer that doesn't play with a lot of new players, or you just aren't looking for this many different types of gateway games, it's entirely possible that you could own none of these games and have a perfectly functioning game collection.
Mm-hmm. And I think after we looked at it a little while and talked about it with the Slack channel, there were a few interesting absences, which are understandable because the Asmodee doesn't own them yet. But, well, to not, spoil the end of the show, you can tune back into the final round near the end of the episode to hear more of our discussion on that.
As always, before we talk about some new Kickstarter projects, we want to give you some updates on the projects we've talked about in the last couple of episodes. Filler from Green Couch Games is currently 169% funded. It has $8,400 of its $5,000 goal. The stretch goals that they've met so far include a 6-player and some special action cards. And that Kickstarter does still have 6 days to go as of the day this is going to drop, so if you are still interested in backing that, you can. I
do like the addition of a 6th player to this game. It definitely played better at the higher player counts, and I'm kind of interested to see what these special action cards do. I kind of dug around the Kickstarter page a bit, and I didn't quite see what they meant, but having another action or two, some different kind of things you can do, could be a lot of fun for a game like this.
Next up, Vinyl from Talon Strike Studios finished its campaign having funded at $38,000 of its $25,000 goal. This earned some really cool stretch goals, including a little plastic crate to keep your cards for your albums in, which I thought was really neat.
Yeah.
I know you're really excited about this one, especially for the theme and just the great gameplay that was in that game.
Yeah, I'm super, super excited that this funded. It kind of looked a little hairy there in the middle of the campaign, but those last 48 hours were super strong. So to those of you out there who back that, awesome, thank you, because now I get to play a final version of this game, and I'm very happy about it. And also, don't forget, click that Remind Me Later button on Kickstarter, and you'll get that 48-hour notification. A lot of times, that's how these Kickstarters get funded, because people get that ding, and they're like, oh yeah, that thing. Let's check it out and see what's going on.
And I'm sure they planned it this way, but this weekend was Record Store Day, so that's a nice little time for them to reach that funding goal.
Mm-hmm.
And finally, Graphic Novel Adventures from Van Ryder Games just managed to squeak up to their funding goal. They're at $242,000 of their $30,000 goal as of right now.
Yes.
And they are still running that campaign as well. So if you are interested in those graphic novel adventures, then you have 5 different novels that you have a choice from, and take a look and see which one really fits your wants, or if you want to get the whole set.
Yeah, that campaign is only going to be running to the end of the day tonight on the day of release of this episode, Monday, April 23rd. So if you are listening to this immediately when it went up and you're still interested in that, you can go check it out. Also, Eric Buscemi from the Cardboard Horde, part of Punchboard Media, did a written review with some really good pictures to show you kind of an idea of what you'd be getting from one of those books. So even if you're listening to this later, check that out on punchboardmedia.com, because then you get a chance to see this, and I'm sure Van Ryder Games is going to have these all over the place come Gen Con and other cons throughout the year. So, in new Kickstarters this week, first of all, we have one that we briefly mentioned last week. The Kitchen Rush expansion, Piece of Cake, is up on Kickstarter from Artipia Games. This is ending on Monday, May 7th. It's currently at $43,000 of the $20,000 goal, so it's fully funded and ready to rock. You can pledge to get the expansion for $29, and you can get the base set plus the expansion for $78. This new expansion to Kitchen Rush adds desserts, ice cream mini orders, two new ingredients, creme and fruit, and also some ice cream scoops, which will, after a few stretch goals, are little wooden balls that are going to be in this kind of 3D kind of freezer thing on the board, which is cool, and I'll talk about that in a second. It also adds a board extension and some other spaces that are going to deal with the dessert actions, most notably that freezer thing right there, where you're going to be storing the ice cream scoops in there. And from what I could glean from looking at the new board layout, it's going to add another section onto your player board as well, that you're going to have to freeze and chill down specific recipes as you're, making those ingredients, obviously, because I guess ice cream has to be cold.
Yes, that is the way ice cream works.
Like we mentioned, there's also the Specialist, which is a 60-second timer. It's a worker who's going to be able to do powered-up actions. Don't know a whole lot more about that. Still trying to get some more information out of that Kickstarter page. The delivery on this one is estimated for November 2018, and Artipia has been pretty reliable with their delivery dates on the Kitchen Rush and other recent stuff. I know a lot of people were really disappointed with Project Elite that they ran, but that was their miniatures game for the first time, and they've gotten a long way since then.
Plus, now they're just doing their minis in little wooden pieces.
Yes.
So it's fine.
Yeah, Kitchen Rush delivered, and we talked about that back in episode 70 and really enjoyed it. So this was literally first hour back for me. I'm so excited to get more Kitchen Rush and try out some new mechanics on that.
Now we can all be back to being bad at Kitchen Rush because there's so many new things.
Yes, so just like those first few games, panicking in the kitchen.
Moving on.
All right, the other one that I wanted to take a look at is The Estates from Capstone Games. This ends on Friday, May 4th. It's currently at $47,000 of the $25,000 funding goal, so well-funded, already knocking out some stretch goals. You can pledge to get this one for $49. There are some vanity tiers available for $100 where you get to put your name or signature on different parts of the game, just kind of add a little bit more realism with some real people into the game, which is always kind of neat. I love those kind of things.
So what part of the story of coal does this tell?
Very well. So Capstone obviously does a lot of games about coal mining and things like that, but this is part of their Simply Complex line, which was started last year with The Climbers, a game that I enjoy and you want to burn in a fire. But the goal behind their Simply Complex line is games that are rules simple but strategy deep. That's kind of what they're talking about with that. And I see that in The Climbers. It is a very simple rule set where you move a person up a step and or use a ladder and then move a block. But there's a lot of depth and maneuvering in that game. This one is kind of a simple explanation, deep strategy of an auction and city building game. Basically, you have 3 rows of blocks, spaces that you're going to be building on, and on a turn, a player will take one of the blocks, either a block or a scoring manipulator or a thing that manipulates one of the rows, and auction it up, and whoever wants it, whoever wants it the most is going to put out the most money, and then the person who's auctioning it can either take that money for the block or put up that money to the person who put the auction to get the block for themselves, so that you have an opportunity to stop that auction from going to somebody else. And then the blocks are going to build up on each of the 3 rows, and once 2 of the rows have been fully completed, the 3rd row is going to be demolished, and then anybody who had built there is going to be penalized. There's also options to, double the scoring of one of the rows, or extend a row longer so you get to kind of manipulate the game length. But from what I hear of people who have played this is going to be an incredibly kind of a backstabby, really kind of mean auction game, which is going to appeal greatly to some people and definitely not to others. But the reason I've got my eye on this one, I really enjoyed the production of The Climbers, and it looks like The Estates is going to be a similar thing. Big, chunky wooden pieces, nice graphic design on the board itself. Obviously, The Climbers didn't have any kind of board, but it had a lot of really great wooden components, the really cool pawns, and I really enjoyed the ladders. It had a very distinctive look to it, and this one's going to be just as big and chunky as The Climbers was. So that's The Estates. I'm interested to give it a shot at some point. I don't know if I'm going to be backing it, but I'm at least interested to play the game.
They are estimating this is going to deliver in October of this year, so hopefully if they stay on track with that, you'll be able to see this before the end of the year.
And I wouldn't be surprised if they had something available at Gen Con, either airship a pallet or just had demos available, so maybe that'll be on the Gen Con events list.
Honestly, with an estimated delivery of October, I wouldn't be surprised if they were aiming for Essen.
Oh yeah, absolutely. So, we have one third Kickstarter to talk about, but this one's going to have to take place in the Recent Plays section, so why don't we just move along there? Want a second opinion on some of the games we talked about on this episode? Check out some other great content creators at punchboardmedia.com. So, first up in Recent Plays, we have a Kickstarter project that is going live tomorrow from our friends over at Board & Dice. We're talking about Blight Chronicles, Agent Decker. It's going to be a release this year from Board & Dice. It plays one player in 60 to 120 minutes. This is designed by Manuel Correa and Matt Dembeck, and this is an evolution of Manuel Correa's original Agent Decker print and play, which was then re-implemented a year or so ago by Board & Dice for Superhot, the card game. And now Board & Dice is bringing us Blight Chronicles Agent Decker. Think a Metal Gear Solid branching storyline campaign setting. In the included mission deck, you're going to go through a number of stages depending on the decisions you make. There's 16 stages in the box, and you're going to do 7 per run.
In Agent Decker, like any deck building game, you're going to start with a starter deck, and that's going to have cards which have 2 different type of power resources. You'll have physical power, i.e. punching things, and evasive power, which is going to let you move around and sort of avoid different threats. You are going to be fighting against a threat deck, which is generated based on the stage that you're playing. When you set the stage out in front of you, it will have symbols that indicate which of the types of threats that you have cards for are going to go into that adversary deck. You will deal out 2 adversary cards which are in close range to you, and then 4 additional adversary cards to make a total of 6 total cards that are out at any point. And then you're going to take those cards that you had drawn into your hand from your starting deck and play them out to use the power to meet the thresholds to either eliminate or knock unconscious the threats that are available to you. If you eliminate the target, which is you play the amount of power that is required and then you take it into your deck, you are going to have that card for future runs through your deck, so it's going to increase the amount of options you have in your hand. If you knock the card unconscious, you're not going to place it in your deck, but you are going to flip it face down, and that means at the end of the round, once you have played out all of your cards, it is going to be available to be placed into the evade deck because you're going to need to evade 1 threat each turn. They need to come from the close targets if there are any available, but if you've knocked something unconscious, you can move it into that pile without suffering any penalty. If you've eliminated something and there's nothing face down, you're going to have to take one of those active threats and move it into the evade pile, which means that you are going to increase the suspicion which is on your agent by the value that is listed on that card. Now, there are 2 types of variables that you are trying to manage when you are taking on these threats. You have suspicion, and each stage will have a threshold where if the suspicion gets above a certain level, you fail the mission. And you also have visibility. Visibility, if it gets too high, will cause your suspicion to continuously go up if it gets increased any farther. So you want to be making sure that you keep yourself in a low suspicion and low visibility state, and that suspicion rating is not going to reset between stages in a mission. So if you get very high but still manage to pass the mission, then you may be in trouble for the next stage because you already have a certain amount of suspicion that's going on. After you have moved that threat to the evaded pile, you are going to fill in your threat row with new cards from the top, making sure that if any of the cards have a reveal power on them, you take the penalty that is required of that card, and making sure that if any of those new cards have a constant threat condition, you take into account that that is something that you now need to abide by. You will draw up a new hand of cards and continue going until you reach the objective for the mission. That is usually going to be to collect a certain number of star tokens, which represent successes in major points of your mission, maybe taking out a guard post or taking out a particularly strong enemy that has something that you need for the mission. And then you're going to fulfill the final objective for completing the mission, maybe discarding a certain number of evade from your hand in order to leave an area or something like that. If your suspicion got too high or you ran out of enemy cards to refill that threat row, you will have failed the mission and you need to redo that stage. if you manage to get through the objective and do the final thing that you need to do to leave the area, you are going to flip over your stage card, and it's going to give you a piece of story and 2 options for your next stage. You may choose whichever option you like, but it's going to dictate which stage you go into next. There are additional story pieces that you're going to read before each mission that are going to fill in the gaps between what can fit on those little stage cards, but it does really create sort of the idea that you are going through this whole sneaking spy mission that you're going on.
The demo box that we played had 5 stages in it, and each of us ran through a different direction of that scenario, so we got a good feeling for everything in there. After the first mission, we chose different paths through and got to experience some of the different ways that the particular mission will play out from there.
I do have to say that the things I experienced in my direction of running through were very different than the ones you experienced, at least story-wise, because I remember we were reading the end of stage paragraphs out loud at first, and you went through a direction where you were going a lot more sneaky, and I went through one that was a lot more punching things, and it felt very different listening to your story beats as opposed to reading my own story beats.
Yeah, and I do really appreciate the way that you, between each of the stages, you get to take your deck and kind of whittle out cards you don't want, but also keep some stuff in there. It's very important because you know that as you go into further stages, you're going to face different kind of stuff, and maybe, like you said, if you're headed down more of an attack track, you're going to want to get more of the red cards in there and maybe whittle out all your blue number 1s or something like that. I really enjoyed that because it made me feel like I was really progressing in this game as a deck builder, which is something that, for the most part, when I play a deck builder, I'm just playing a one-shot and then you reset your deck to the basic state and play a new thing. I have a feeling that as you continue to go on through what will eventually be the full mission of Blight Chronicles Agent Decker, that you're going to see a lot of really cool development of your deck and refinement to what you want your character to be.
I think it's also interesting that they made a valid reason to keep some of the low-powered cards in your deck, because if you want to fight any of those threats that are not in the close range to you, you need to spend 1, or if they're farther down the row, 2 evade power in order to even take on those threats. You're going to need to keep some low-powered evade cards in your deck if you want to have the ability to fight those farther away threats. And there are certain missions where it is useful to be able to get in a hit on an enemy which is farther away, but is still really important that you can take down if you draw a very strong hand. Maybe you draw a couple of 2s in a hand and you know that you've got somebody who's 6 power that you're going to need to eliminate from that threat row sooner rather than later. If you have 1 evade power card, then you can do that when you have a strong hand instead of waiting for them to get closer and then hoping that you draw another strong hand.
I also thought it was really cool the way that story beats came through in the cards as well. Depending on the way you set up for a stage, maybe you had specific cards in specific areas. Like, I remember one scenario where you had the big, bad, scary beat-up guy who was in Space 6. He's always starts in space 5 or 6 or whatever it was in this particular stage, so that you've got this big fight from this big guy coming down, and you've got to get your cards in the right place and set your deck up just right so that when that card finally does get to the nearby spaces, it's not going to give you a serious walloping. I also really enjoyed the fact that there are specific cards off to the side in these hold areas that are cards that you have to interact with, like a storeroom or a guardhouse, something like that you're going to have to deal with, but you don't have to wait for them to come up again because it's a physical location, where it is. You just have to be set up to do it at the right time. And then, of course, all those cards, as you do overcome or eliminate them, are going to come into your deck, and then they have cool mechanics that come back when they do come back around. Maybe, I got the night vision goggles out of that guard shack, and that's something that's going to give me a power later on. We didn't really talk in the overview about how some of the cards you get are also tools instead of just cards that come through your deck, and I think that's a really awesome function as well. Some of the cards you can get will be tools that you will just put out in front of you as equipable items that will give you some kind of a buff like that.
Like a fancy new outfit.
Yes. The outfits is really important, and I feel like that was a really cool way to make it feel like a Metal Gear Solid or a stealth video game, because you got to knock out a guy, steal their outfit, and then go stealth around in it. And it lowers your visibility too, so there's that direct thematic gameplay connection there as well.
I also liked how every round you are going to be removing one of those close threats to your evade pile, because it means that if you get 2 really strong threats early in the game when you're not necessarily equipped to deal with them, when your deck isn't really super strong, or you just drew a poor hand, you are not going to be stuck with those threats taking damage from them until you're able to deal with them. One of them is automatically going to get removed at the end of every round, so you're going to be constantly cycling that deck, which is helpful, but it also means that you're going to be constantly going through that threat deck, and if that threat deck ever runs out, you're going to lose the game. So you don't have a lot of time to dawdle, but you're not going to get to a point where you can in a lot of deck builders where the trade row is just not something that you can deal with, and it just stays there and stagnates for a long time.
It looks like this is going to be going up on Kickstarter for $45 for the base box. It comes with that initial mission pack, the board, the components you need, so on and so forth. And there's also going to be a $60 deluxe box that comes with 2 additional agent decks, so you have new basic starting decks to start with that might be leaning specifically towards interacting with electronic equipment, is what they said is one of the ones, for example. That one is also going to come with some upgraded components. You get plastic tokens instead of punchboard, which is nice as well.
Now, the base box is only coming with the one mission, though, correct? As of now.
Right, as of now.
Now, that mission does have 16 different stages in it, and I do see this as the kind of game where if you played it through once and you took a specific route, you could go the other route, and I'm sure it's going to branch a lot more, and you might not want to play an entire, like, every single stage, play through and make the last choice differently, and then play through and make the second to last choice differently. That could get a little old. But I could at least see from the main start point taking one of the 2 branches and then going and taking the other 2 branch to get sort of different ways to get into the mission. They are saying that this is going to be sort of a console system, so while you only play one mission, this is sort of feels like the way that Time Stories is working. You get the game, and you get the first mission, and then in the future they're looking to do additional missions should this be popular.
Yeah.
So that may be something you want to consider if you're trying to decide whether or not this is something you want to back or if it's worth the value to you.
And as of time of recording, we don't know much about what the stretch goals are going to be. It's entirely possible that they plan to add on some more additional missions or additional stages into that campaign if it does start to take off. And frankly, I hope that it does. I really enjoyed how Blight Chronicles mimicked the fight versus stealth decisions that you'd get in a Metal Gear Solid game, but in a deck builder. So keep an eye out for that. Blight Chronicles Agent Decker for Board and Dice goes up on Tuesday, April 24th.
Next, we got to play the expansion for Las Vegas Boulevard. This is a 2014 release from Ravensburger. It plays 1 to 8 players in 30 to 75 minutes. The designer is once again Rudiger Dorn, and the artists are Harold Leisky and Mia Steingraber. This is a game of lots and lots and lots and lots and lots of dice, and I guess area control if you want to get technical.
First up, let me explain the base Las Vegas so you know what we're talking about when we talk about the expansion stuff. There is a set of 6 casinos in front of you, numbered 1 through 6, and on the beginning of each round, you're going to be dealing out money cards to each of the casinos so that you basically have some cards that you're trying to get, which is not surprising because you have to get all the best money to win. You're going to have a set of 8 dice for yourself of a specific color. You're going to roll them, and then you're going to separate them up into whatever numbers they may be, and you're going to take a look at the casinos, and you'll take a look at your dice, and you're going to take all of the dice of one number out of your dice and place it onto the matching casino. The goal here is at the end of the round that you have the most dice of whatever number on that casino. When you do, you then get whatever the highest value bill is at that particular casino. It goes into your personal supply, and then you move on to the next casino, judge that one, so on and so forth. The catch here is, each round, you're going to be re-rolling any remaining dice you have, so your options are continually changing. And then also, the real rub is that if you tie with somebody else for the same number of dice on a casino, those dice are canceled, and neither person gets anything. This is always a huge, huge problem in this game, because everybody goes after the $90,000 bill, and maybe 3 people each have 3 dice on there, and they all match up, and nobody gets any money, and maybe if you're really lucky, somebody put 1 die on there, and they walk away with all the winnings. It's Las Vegas. It's not going to be 100% fair. So you'll go through a number of rounds depending on player count, total up your money, and whoever has the most money has won that particular game of Las Vegas.
So that's Las Vegas, but what does Las Vegas Boulevard add to the game?
Well, I'm glad you asked, because that's the entire reason for this segment. In Las Vegas Boulevard, you have a whole bunch of new exciting modules that you can plug into your game of Las Vegas to add a little bit more spice, a little more craziness to the game.
I want the pasta attachment.
That is not part of Las Vegas Boulevard, I'm sorry.
Oh.
So from simplest to craziest expansion modules, we have $100,000 notes that are going to obviously draw a lot of people to that casino that it lands on. There's oversized dice that count as 2 dice. They replace one of your 8 initial dice, and they have to be placed, obviously, as a whole die whenever you place that number. There's a 7th casino that comes on the end that anybody can place any number onto, but once somebody has placed a number onto it, nobody else can place that number onto it. So if I put a pair of 3s on there, nobody else can place 3s on that casino, but a pair of 4s will beat it, or 3 of a different other kind will beat it as well. There's white dice that everybody gets an equal number, and you roll them with all of your stuff, and if you place them, they are basically the house and a extra player that will just get in the way, and the money goes to the house. There are purple dice, where everybody would get one, and when you roll, if you place a purple die, you have to kick another die off of that particular casino. There are rainbow money cards that don't get replaced by an actual money card until the end of the round, where it pays out whatever the next card off the top of the deck is. There are bills worth $50,000 for each bill of a specific value that you collect throughout the game. There's a set of solo rules, there are new variants, and there are also some one-shot action cards that you deal out to everybody at the start of each round, and they're just one-time use actions where maybe you get to move a die or move a card around and just basically completely change the way that you're playing this game. That's a lot of stuff. That's a lot of weird modules in a box.
You're certainly getting your money's worth for this expansion.
Holy moly. I mean, especially because this is a expansion that is difficult to find. It's not available in the US. I happened across a copy on Board Game Bliss that went up. They got like a weird restock of a case of it on like Easter Sunday, and I just happened to be looking online at the right time, and there it is. And
the Easter Bunny brought you Las Vegas Boulevard.
If you like Las Vegas, you're going to have to do some hunting, but eventually, hopefully, a copy of it pops up. When we played with the $100,000, we played with the 7th casino, and we played with the big dice, and I think those are all the ones we played with at that particular time.
Yes.
But even those things added such a breath of fresh air into a game that, while good, and, you know, a game we play often, is going to be playing the same way every time. And the fact that I have 10 modules to throw around with Las Vegas now, it's just, I'm so excited about having this box.
I particularly like that 7th casino, that slot machine casino, because normally when you're playing with just the casinos numbered 1 to 6, if you roll a bunch of numbers where you don't really have a chance to get into the running for the money there, you put a die on it, and maybe you're not even the second place, so if the first place players tie, you're essentially throwing away a die. This gives you another option with your roll that you can take some of the dice that maybe wouldn't help you if you place them on their numbered casino, but you can place them on that slot machine casino and at least give yourself a little bit of a chance of getting some additional money. And that casino gets dealt out like all of the other ones, so sometimes you could get some really, really lucrative payouts on that 7th casino as well.
Mm-hmm. Oh, another thing I like, you know, since this thing increases the player count up from the 5 in the base game up to a potential 8, there's also a new card in there that tells you how much money gets dealt out to each casino until you start dealing the next one. In the base game, it was always over 50,000, you move on to the next one. But with higher player counts, having a higher number means that there's more bills on each casino, which means, obviously, that more people are going to get payouts from those casinos. And that's really important in a higher player count game, because otherwise you would just have, okay, well, 2 people got money this round and everybody else tied, and that's just not a whole lot of fun.
Yeah, but you can still get that, you know, first flip on a casino is the $100,000 card, and then everybody's going for that one, and then nobody else is getting anything off of it.
I'm really excited to also try out some of the other ones that manipulate the money. They recommend these for lower player count games, and I really feel like the one that changes the value once you're paying it out could be really exciting. And I like the idea of bills that are worth $50,000 for each bill of a specific value. So you get the one that's maybe the $10,000 or the $20,000 buff, and you're going to start actually making those bills worth something. And that's really exciting to have that opportunity to turn trash into real points.
He says $10,000 is trash.
Well, on the Boulevard, you know.
I do think that the solo player expansion is just kind of weird. Like, I can't see myself wanting to play a solo game and being like, you know what I really wish was solo? Las Vegas. That's the game I want to play right now. I mean, there are so many great solo games. We're talking about 2 of them, at least in this episode.
Oh, very true.
That one doesn't seem super impressive to me, but some of the other ones in this expansion are just so great and added new life into this game.
I also, you know, we have the white dice and the purple dice, the house and the kickers to play around with, which could turn, like the kickers especially, it's going to turn Las Vegas into a cutthroat area control game. Mm-hmm. That is going to become exceptionally mean. We will play it exactly once, and then we will all get in a fight about it. But yeah, if you were looking for Las Vegas Boulevard, I highly, highly encourage you to do the legwork to find a copy of this. Maybe if you're lucky, Board Game Bliss will get another restock. I don't know. You can probably get some of like Amazon.de or something like that. But if you're a fan of Las Vegas, the Boulevard expansion is super worth your money. Up next, we've got 2 games from North Star Games, and they are launching these under their Happy Planet line, which is a line of smaller, fun, quick party games, following along in the style of Happy Salmon that they released a few years back. The first one is called Monster Match, and this is a 2018 release that plays 2 to 6 players in about 10 minutes. It's designed by Ken Gruhl and Quentin Weir, with art by Linda DeSantis, and is a dexterity recognition game with donut collection, monsters with no eyes, legs, or arms.
So in Monster Match, you're going to start with a deck of monsters which have varying numbers of a couple of different things. They're going to have varying numbers of eyes, varying numbers of arms, and varying numbers of legs, just like Jake said. You're going to take this deck of monsters and deal out 10 monsters to the table, and you're also going to place this token which says Zilch in the center of the table. You also receive with the game 2 custom dice. One of them has a number with a number of 0 through 5 on it, and the other has little illustrations of eyes, arms, and legs, 2 of each. You're going to take turns rolling these dice, and once they have landed, say they land on 1 eye, everybody at the table is going to point to a monster that's face up that has only 1 eye. If there are no monsters face up that have 1 eye, then the first person to grab that Zilch token is going to be the winner of the round. But if there are monsters which have 1 eye, or whatever you happen to roll on the die, everybody is going to try to point to one. There may not be enough for everyone, which is where that dexterity element comes in. You're going to want to get there very quickly. If you manage to point to a monster that meets the criteria on the die, you're going to collect it into your collection, and each monster card has a number of donuts on the bottom corner, 1 to 3. That is how many points that monster is going to be worth. So you're hoping that you have pointed to the most valuable monster of the type that you rolled. So you're going to try to be scouting around to find which ones are the valuable ones. The dice are going to pass to the next player, and everybody's going to try to collect as many monsters of as good a value as possible. Like I said, if there are no monsters of the specific type, somebody's going to grab that Zilch token. When that happens, they're going to get the top monster off the stack because they get to score something. And then you're going to add 10 more monsters out to the table. So now you've widened your pool. You're going to keep going until the stack of monsters is empty and you are not able to refill the table anymore. And at that point, you're going to see who has the most donuts, and the person with the most donuts, as always, is the winner.
That's kind of how I like to live my life. I like to get the most donuts I can.
You need to find the very best donuts,
Got to find the very best donuts. I had a ton of fun playing this game, and it's something that I didn't expect to have so much fun with, which honestly, like the original Happy Salmon, I looked at the rules and just like, that's the whole game? But then playing it once and then twice and then 5 and 59 times, it feels like. Every single time we play this, we get more and more excited about seeing, our favorite monster come out on the table, the one with 5 legs, 5 eyes, 5 arms.
That's the one with none of anything. That's the best monster.
But it's so fun and quick and easy that it's perfect for any kind of big game night, and I just love having it, especially because it's another one of those kind of like neoprene pouch. It is a little monster with 2 legs and some arms, and it's all orange and funny looking.
It's a great little packet. But like you said, this game always is super fun when it comes to the table. We've played it with people who I really didn't expect to like this game, who don't generally like really light games or anything that's got dexterity in it. And because these monsters have so much personality, and because you're really just investing a couple of minutes and you're just trying to get to that monster before the other person gets to the monster, because if you get your finger on it first, that's your monster and they have to go claim another one. Mm-hmm. Or maybe you're waiting to see if really you should grab the Zilch token, and everybody's kind of looking around to make sure that there isn't a monster that meets that dice roll because, you just refilled it or something, and you're hoping like, oh shoot, it's not like the 19th of the 20 monsters that's out, is it? It's a really good, fun time, and it feels like playing the game is the fun of it, not winning the game. And I think that's what these Happy Planet games are all about. They're about having a great fun time in doing what you're doing, and not necessarily about being the one who wins. And I think this is really something that we should be fostering in the gaming community. Have fun gaming.
Mm-hmm. And then second up, we have Funky Chicken, also a 2018 release from North Star Games. Plays 3 to 6 players in roughly 2 minutes. It's designed by Ken Gruhl, Quentin Weir, and Satish Pillalamari. The art is also by Linda DeSantis, and this is a real-time goofy dancing and stuff game, exactly like Happy Salmon, but you do the chicken dance instead.
Like Jake said, if you've played Happy Salmon, you're going to have no trouble learning Funky Chicken, but in case you haven't played Happy Salmon, which you should, I will go through the rules real quick. Everybody's going to receive a deck of cards, which has 4 different actions on it. You are going to flip up the top card of your deck, and you're going to try to find somebody else who has the same action on their top card. And if you find a partner that has that same action, you're going to perform the action, then discard the card to the center of the table and move on. The goal is to be the first person who gets rid of all of their cards, and that person is the winner. The 4 different actions that you're going to have in Funky Chicken are spin, where you're going to spin around in place. Both players are going to spin around in place. Swing, where you're going to run from where you were standing at the table to meet up with the other person, and then do a do-si-do where you hook elbows and spin in a circle once, and then run back to your original position. You're going to have a bump where you run from your position to bump hips with the other person and then run back to your position. And, of course, Funky Chicken, where you take your thumbs and you put them in your armpits and you flap your arms like a chicken and you go, so funky.
Funky.
Like I said, you're going to be going through this until you run out of cards, and whoever runs out of cards first is the winner. This is the same mechanics as Happy Salmon. They've just changed the actions. And for my money, I think I'd probably stick with Happy Salmon, but that's because Funky Chicken takes up a little bit more space, and we generally play this in breweries where there's not a whole ton of room to be running around the table. That being said, if you get Funky Chicken and you have the original green version of Happy Salmon, the deck colors are the same, so you can combine the cards from Funky Chicken and the cards from Happy Salmon. You just pick 4 of the 8 total actions that you'll have then, and you can make your own deck. That means you could make a deck where you have lots of running around if you take the swing and the switcheroo from the original Happy Salmon and the hip bump from this, and maybe keep the Funky Chicken because it's fun to go so funky.
No, Happy Salmon.
There you go. You can make a very movement-heavy deck, or if you don't have the space and you have both games, you could use the Funky Chicken and the spin from Funky Chicken, and then put it with maybe the Happy Salmon or the High Five or the Bump from Happy Salmon, and make a non-movement deck if you're in a tight space.
Okay.
Now, with Funky Chicken, even if you're playing with just the hand motion, what they call the quiet version, where they have hand motions for each action, so you're not just everybody screaming out loud in a public place, you do still have to say, so funky.
Just
so
quietly and under your breath.
Everybody's going to know that you're playing Funky Chicken.
Can I do it NPR? It's so funky.
This is ASMR, Funky Chicken. Anyway, this is a great game to add to Happy Salmon if you already have Happy Salmon. If you don't already have Happy Salmon and you want a neoprene chicken wearing sunglasses as opposed to a neoprene salmon, then get yourself some Funky Chicken.
These are real decisions, peoples.
Indeed they are. So that is the 2 new games in the Happy Planet line. We enjoyed both of them. If you had to only pick one, I would certainly say pick Monster Match, but they are both winners. If you are looking for a light, fun party game that's going to get you really excited to game.
Yes, thank you so much for that, Danielle. Now it's time to move on to our review segment in which we talk about Rising 5.
So funky!
So funky. As a Viking leader, I know a good deal about murder, but not so much about Hong Kong or forensic science.
I've got you covered, Gunner. As a forensic scientist, I hate when I see the same crimes over and over again. Deception Undercover Allies, the new expansion for Deception Murder in Hong Kong, adds 130 new means and clues cards, many of which capitalize on some of the situations less frequently encountered by us forensic scientists, so you'll never have to see the same crime twice. It also let me hire a lab tech who can check if a certain item was used in a crime at all. But watch out, because they hired some new detectives too, and one of them might be an inside guy spreading rumors and confusion. All seasoned Hong Kong detectives should check out Deception Undercover Allies at greyfoxgames.com.
Ah, good. Now they'll never find out about the... I saw Bjorn just yesterday tending a whole colony of bees. Must have been him.
Grey Fox Games. Quality games, cleverly crafted.
That's totally the bees.
We recently got to play Rising 5 Runes of Astros, which is a recent release from Grey Fox Games, and if that ad in the last bump didn't make it exceptionally clear, Grey Fox Games is a sponsor of the show, and we did receive a review copy, and we wanted to be forthcoming about that so that you can take that into account when you're listening to what we say. We don't think it colors our opinion, but I know some people do. This game originally came out in 2017 from Gary Kim Games, but it is releasing under the Gray Fox logo in 2018. It is a 1 to 5 player game that plays in about 30 minutes. The designers are Gary Kim and Evan Song, and the art is by Vincent Dutrait, and it shows. This is a game of deduction and character abilities and dice rolling, and there's an app for that.
In Rising 5, you and all of your other players are controlling a set of 5 characters, the 5 who are the titular Rising 5, who are on a mission to seal the gates of Asteros from releasing evil. Nominally, that's what you're doing.
Sure.
The way you're going to accomplish this is you have a set of 7 runes that each have a specific color and symbol assigned to them, and 4 of them need to be placed on the board in a specific order. There's basically a cross formation. You need to have a northwest, south, and east rune on the board there. Each of the runes corresponds to a specific constellation token, and using the app, you have to find out what constellation goes with which rune, and which rune needs to be in which position on that particular cross setup. If you've ever played the old deduction game Mastermind, it's a very similar idea where you have a code that you're trying to figure out, and by checking the entire set of 4 runes up there, you're going to get different information about which ones are correct and in the right place, and which ones don't need to be in your particular setup at all. But rather than this just being a game of moving the runes back and forth and then asking the app if you're right, you have to do an additional set of kind of like an action selection worker placement mechanic, which will allow you to manipulate the runes and also go out into some action spaces on the board in order to collect these cubes that you need to then activate the checking mechanism that the app functions as. On your turn, you're going to have a number of cards, and each card has a picture of one of the 5 different characters in the game. You're going to select a specific character you want to interact with. Everybody controls every character in this game, and you're going to take however many cards you have of that character that you wish to commit and play them all together to execute that many number of actions. So the actions you have are either moving or encountering a card at one of the action spaces, or using the checking mechanism of the app to check your particular setup at this time. You have to commit all of your cards at the start of your turn, so you can't move and then encounter and then afterwards decide to add another card to check later. You have to say, I'm going to do 3 actions if you want to do something like that. Each of the 5 characters also has their own free action that they will execute at the start of the turn. One of them allows you to move somebody somewhere for free. One character specifically is the only person that can move runes back and forth on the cross and also on the sideboard, manipulate stuff in and out. There's another character that duplicates the action of another character that they're on the same world space as, and then the other 2 characters kind of manipulate another combat mechanic that I will talk about in a little second here. So, as an action when you want to encounter, you're going to flip over a card at one of the regions you're at. There are 3 regions on the board, and there's 2 spaces per region, so you're going to be filtering out of a main region deck into each of those 2 spaces. They start with specific cards, so you know kind of idea of what you're going to get into on that first encounter, but basically you're going to flip over the card and do whatever it says. Maybe it'll give you a free reward or an artifact or something like that will give you special power, but a good number of them are going to be a combat test you have to overcome. The combat tests will have a number from 1 to 5. If you run into a 5, it's big bad news, and you got to really worry about that. But for every combat check, you're going to roll a die, and if you match or exceed the number on that card, you win. There's a few different kinds of mitigation you can do, however, which are pretty nice. First of all, if you have another character on the same space as you, you get a +1 on that particular combat check. So you start with an added 1 before you even roll the die, which is great. The die is numbered between 1 and 4, with also an additional space that is just an instant fail, but if you roll that 1 through 4, those numbers then become 2 through 5. Also, before you go into that encounter, other players can commit cards out of their hand of the particular character you're using as support, and every card that they play of that character is a +1. It allows you to have more certainty over that, and realistically, when you get to those boss cards in whatever region you're in, you want to make sure that you're getting those combat checks on the first time, because there are some pretty serious consequences. If you don't succeed at a combat check, there was a symbol on there that will tell you how many steps the eclipse marker on the side of the board will move. It's just a simple track. I think it's 8 or 9 spaces, and if that goes all the way to the bottom, you just lose outright. So you want to be attacking and overcoming those combat checks right when they come up. Otherwise, they're going to, cause you losses and then more losses as you go on. The other thing that's bad about not defeating a monster is that in the draw deck that you're getting more character cards out of, there are a few of these red moon cards, and when one of those comes up, you stop drawing immediately, and at the end of the next player's turn, any undefeated monsters will cost you additional moons additional eclipse spaces, which is definitely not good because could be a whole bunch all at once that could skyrocket you all the way to the bottom. But if you overcome the combat checks, you generally get something out of it, like one of the 4 cubes you need to activate your checking mechanism. Some of the higher level things will give you some special artifacts that maybe allow you to kill a monster outright without any issues, or skip over one of those red moons, or there's one that gives you 3 cubes, which is really awesome because then you can quickly get to one of your rune checks. Circling back around to the player powers, the other 2 characters, one of them allows you to combat a monster, have a free combat roll against a monster that is exposed on a different space of the board, which is really cool. And the other one, anytime you use that particular character, the eclipse tracker slides up 1 for free, and that's good because it buys you a little more time as well. So a few ways you can lose the game. Obviously, if that eclipse marker goes all the way to the bottom, you've lost. And also, if you run out of cards in your character deck before you figure out the runes sequence, you also lose. The only way to win the game is to get all 4 of the runes into the right place, and then go through one final check to confirm that all of them are where they're supposed to be. If you've done that, then you did a very good thing, and then all of you can high-five each other because you have won this game of Rising 5 Runes of Asteros.
So to start off with the presentation, this game is absolutely gorgeous to look at. It has a full board of Vincent Dutrait art, which is nice and bright, but at the same time, it's not like garish. It's really well done. Vincent Dutrait's art is always gorgeous. It's got standees of the figures, which I think highlights that art particularly well, so you can see it. And it's not like a miniature figurine where it wouldn't be true to the art. The cards are really just nice full illustration cards. Everything about this, I think, is well produced. The only thing that does look a little wonky is that piece that you put in the middle of the cross, but it has to be that way because it is what the app uses to find where the center is and orient itself. So you kind of have to excuse that because it's a technology thing.
Well, at the same time, I think it's worth talking about the app because this is one of the biggest troubles that we had with the game. Play it in good lighting if you're playing this game, because low lighting is going to be difficult with an app-based camera like this.
Even actually in really decent lighting, like we were playing this on our dining room table, which has an overhead light that was right above us, and the app was still having trouble reading what the runes were. So if you are going to play this and use the automatic reading on the app where you just hold it over and it takes a picture, double check whatever the input was when you get the results, when it tells you what the constellations are that you have scanned, because we had a couple of times where like yellow and orange got switched,
or the blue and
one
the light blue
got switched for the other blue. There is a manual input option where you can just drag the rune tiles to the position that you have them.
Yeah.
But I know you had some trouble when you were dragging them if you accidentally let them go before they were over the position that you wanted to place them in. They just disappeared and you couldn't place them anymore.
Yeah, that is kind of a pain.
So if you are picking this game up at this point, do know that you are going to need to double check. Maybe they'll update the app in the future with a little bit better recognition or fix that manual input issue. But as of right now, we did have some trouble with it reading incorrectly.
Yeah, and I want to loop back around to the board again, because like we said, the board is really pretty. It's full color art. I really enjoyed the character designs. They're not all just, generic space person in suit. It's a neat wide range, and they're drawn off of some archetypes. Like us as at least me as science fiction fan, I kind of had named a number of the characters as, oh, this is Guardians of the Galaxy guy. Oh, this is Lilu from The Fifth Element.
I named the one guy Gopher because he looks like a gopher.
Yeah, but it's really fun, good-looking art. We did have one comment about the board, kind of in a similar way that we talked about Agra a few episodes ago. The art is so strong that it's kind of easy to overlook the action spaces at first glance.
Well, the action spaces are done in the same style as the ones in Agra, where they're not actually hard definition on the action spaces. Mm-hmm. They're sort of a medium opacity swoosh that doesn't form a complete circle. It's like a C shape almost.
Yeah.
So they would be easy to miss even if there wasn't bold art beneath them. But with that really bold, saturated art, having a low opacity on the action circles was a little bit difficult. Now, that being said, there are also cards right next to the action circle. So if you missed the space, there's only 6 of them. You put the thing next to the card that you want. But it just kind of peeved me because after having played Agra, another game where action spaces were really important, just seeing those same low opacity, easy to miss action spaces just like gave me some flashbacks to that.
Yeah, I think I can excuse this game for, it's only so many spaces, and the art is really good. It is a very, very nice board, and I do really like looking at it. So I'll give him that. Rulebook, it was easy to learn from, and I do appreciate a good reference for the different artifacts and such. It's all, one page has all those things clearly defined.
I did occasionally go to look something up, and it wasn't in the section that I expected it to be in, but it's only like a 6-page rulebook, so if it's not on the page you think it's on the other page.
Yeah.
So it's not a huge issue. Everything that I went to look up was in there. It just might not have been in the spot I originally thought it would be.
Yeah, and I do have to actually say, since I played a lot of Mastermind as a kid, it was nice for me to be able to look at the rulebook and say, okay, so that's how they're implementing the way that this works. Okay, so the different color pegs are just the different color or the different constellations in this game.
Speaking of the constellations, you have tokens which represent the constellations that you are using to indicate when you're not looking at the checks on the app what state each of the constellations are in. So maybe the app tells you that the thing that looks like a lion is in the correct spot and it should be there, but the thing that looks like a beholder is in the wrong spot, but it should be there. I wish that the names of the constellations were printed even just on the bottom corner of the tile, because a lot of times, like when we were playing this with a larger group, I'd be talking about the skeleton that's looking to the left, and everybody else thought I was talking about the skeleton sort of monster thing that was looking to the right. And just to have those names on there, even if they were small, so you could sort of get an indication without having to just use descriptors. I know you said they're in the rulebook, but if you don't have that out during the game, it would be nice if the tiles were labeled.
So let's talk about the gameplay here. We have the foundation of hard deduction with that Mastermind rune and constellation matching system, but we've added in all of this kind of randomness and objectives and stuff like that on top of that. How do you feel that affects the way that the game plays for you?
I think it makes this game for a very specific person.
Okay.
Because the two halves of the game are really sort of aimed at different styles of gamers. You have people who want to do a hard deduction game where, you scan this and you decide that this can be one of 2 runes, and then you have to switch it. And everything that you gain from the scanning is very much factual, and you can manipulate the facts to get the information to know which runes should be where and what you need to switch out. But everything you need to do to make the machine that allows you to do that work is almost Ameritrashy. There's dice rolling combat that you can mitigate, but there is an instant fail condition, so you can never fully mitigate that. There is a random encounter deck where you've got some knowledge of what's going to come up, because like you said, those starting cards are always going to be the same. So if you encounter one of the starting cards and it's, maybe a free benefit, the other one's going to be a combat. But once you get past that, the next card could be the 5 combat boss, or the next card could be an artifact that just gives you another benefit. You don't really know. There's a little bit of mitigation in which area you go to activate a card, but there is a level 5 boss in Area 1, just like there is in Area 3. So I feel like a lot of what makes the system work, because you need to get 4 of those silk cubes in order to activate the system that checks. The idea is that you get these cubes and you put them up on the altars, and then you can check whether you got your runes in the correct place. In order to do that, you need to engage in combats, and you can never be sure you're going to get a cube on your next flip, and you can never be sure of what's going to come up or how you're going to resolve the combat, even if you commit a ton of cards. So it feels weird to me that you're going through this really thinky and hard facts deduction puzzle, but doing it with a thematic Ameritrash style machine. It makes it for a very specific gamer, in my opinion.
I think that might be the specific gamer that is me, honestly, because I really enjoyed adding on that kind of more gamification of a logic puzzle. I've played logic puzzles a lot. I played a lot of Mastermind growing up, and realistically, if I tackled a normal game of Mastermind today, I wouldn't get a whole lot of excitement out of it, because I understand the patterns and I know, okay, I have to try these 2 moves to see if I get this information about X token. And I feel like if this game was just deduction and didn't have more to play on it, it wouldn't really be a whole lot of a game left anymore because you know the puzzle. It's basically solved at that point. I like having that decision of, I know that I've got this kind of encounter over here, and I feel like I'm at a point right now where I have a specific set of cards and you have a specific set of cards that we can send Captain Avenger Man over here with the big hero 8 so that he's able to, get buffed with an extra point on the combat here, and you've got 2 of that card, so I feel like I can be prepared for anything there. And I like the excitement of, I'm going to flip over this card and, oh, it's the 5 level boss, we're prepared for that. Or, oh, it's just a free cube, we've got extra cards we can play with now. And I think the thing that's really been interesting to me as we played this game and as we've gotten better at kind of understanding the patterns is that every time we play this game, we're still getting down to the very end of that draw deck. I don't think we've ended a game with more than 5 cards left in that draw deck yet, which is really well balanced. I'm surprised how well the game is paced out, that you have to do a certain number of actions and deplete your deck a certain number of times to do enough checks and swaps for the deduction part to be completed.
There is also the ability to change the difficulty of the deck to add more or to reduce the number of the red moon cards that are in the draw deck, which are going to stop your draw and cause you to take more of the red moon damage if you have any exposed monsters. So if you get to the point where you are really good at it and you're consistently ending with a bunch of extra cards, you could throw a couple extra moon cards, maybe play with the 5 red moon cards, and that's going to give you a little bit more difficulty.
I honestly am a little bit bummed that that's the only kind of difficulty modification that there is for the game, is just adding in 3, 4, or 5 of those red moons. Obviously I'm not a game designer, so I can't come up with any other really cool ideas right now, but I'd like to see, more variability in the decks, maybe get some different kinds of monsters in there, or some way that's going to change up a little bit more to add some more exciting difficulty. And in a way, I'm a little bit kind of bummed that we didn't know about this game when it was on Kickstarter 3 years ago, because there was a ridiculous amount of other kinds of content and other monsters and stuff like that I think could have added that stuff in. So maybe if we're lucky, we'll see that stuff released as an expansion someday. So we had an opportunity to play this game at pretty much every player count. I know I played 2-player and 5-player, and we played a 3-player game at one point, and you played a solo as well, right?
I did play it solo, and I also played it at 4.
Okay, cool. So there's all of the numbers. So what did you think about the differences between a lower and a higher player count in this game?
I liked this game actually with fewer players, with 1 or 2 players was really the sweet spot for me. It played fine with 4 or 5, and at 4 or 5, it really does give you the mechanic of the draw deck as the game timer a little bit more, because it's very easy in a 4 or 5 player game to want to overcommit cards so that you need to only roll a minimal success in order to beat a monster. Say you need to only roll a 1, which is the lowest successful roll you can have. And that temptation at a higher player game is really strong, and you need to avoid it, because if you are always committing a lot of cards, then you're going to burn through your draw deck very quickly, and you're just going to run out of time without getting the cubes into position to do the number of checks that you need. While I really enjoyed that, I do feel like it sometimes got a little bit muddy in the direction that everybody was going and what cards were available at a higher player count. And it felt more susceptible to quarterbacking at a higher player count, where one person was in charge of looking at the app and seeing the puzzle and trying to figure out what needed to be done and looking at everybody's cards and then just letting everybody else know. Even in a group of strong gamers, just with a lot of players, that was sort of the tendency, particularly if they're new players.
Yeah.
With 1 player, obviously you can't have quarterbacking in a 1-player game. That doesn't work.
Or you have only quarterbacking.
In a 1-player game, but there's really no downside to it. And it worked really well as a solo game because you could do the deduction on your own. In the solo game, you have a support hand that you can only use to add to your combat rolls. So you still have that backup where if I don't have the cards, somebody else can commit. But though that somebody else is just a dummy player, and that hand gets refilled every turn as well. With 2 players, you can really talk through the deduction puzzle, and everybody can take a chance and look at it's really easy to hold the app so that both players can see it. There's only 1 other set of cards, so you don't have to, look around the table and try to keep inventory of everybody's cards. and you're not drawing nearly as much every time you get to do something, which in a larger game, you're doing less yourself because there are more players between each of your turns. And that means because the draw deck is the timer, you're just going to get to do less stuff, which is less fun.
Yeah. A 4 or 5 player game works just fine, but like you said, you're burning through cards so quickly in a 4 or 5 player game that it just doesn't really hook me as much. I definitely enjoyed, I think 2 or 3 is the sweet spot. I like having the ability to draw support, and I liked with 3 players having 2 different hands to support from, because that allowed you to pull off some really great mitigation every now and then, and also just, wider option. But once you get up to the 4 or 5 players, the option is too wide to the point where everybody can support everything, and that's not as exciting to me. 2 players worked really well, and I like having this in our collection now, because it is we can knock it out in 30 minutes kind of deduction game. And I really feel like the challenge in this game is going to come from how fast can we get through it? How quickly can we get the deduction figured out? And I think a lot of that will come from us learning how to really tackle the stuff in the level 3 deck, which is the region that has the hardest difficulty stuff, because the payouts are higher, you get cubes faster over there. So as we get more comfortable with the way that the cards are going to come out and how the different things interact in the deck, I feel like we can start tackling that region 3 more aggressively so that we finish the game with more cards left in our draw deck. I'd love to find a way to get it to the point where we have 10, 15 cards left in that deck and see what that does to our overall rating.
That's
because
some wishful thinking.
The app does actually give you a rating, and it's always been a C.
Plus, plus, plus.
C++, plus, very true.
Now, I think what you were just saying actually ties into the replayability of this game. You are essentially playing the same game every time. You just have a different setup of runes that you're attempting to solve the puzzle for. But the movement of the characters could realistically be tackled with a similar strategy every time. But I think where the replayability of this is actually really good is that as you do learn those cards, you have more information with which to build a strategy. Mm-hmm. So the first time you play through, you're using the player powers in the best way that you possibly can think of, but you don't necessarily understand what you're going to be up against. Whereas now that we've played this through 6 times, I know that in that level 2 deck there are 3 cards that are a level 3 fight that will increase our moon and give us a cube. And as I'm taking on cards in that position, if I've seen all 3 of them, I know that there are no more of those cards. But if I haven't seen them, I know that they're still to come, and they're very likely, if there's only 2 cards left, going to be one of those. I think the replayability comes with learning how to improve your strategy. That being said, there will be a point where you know all the cards and you won't improve your strategy anymore, but I think there is a good amount of replayability, and since you get a new logic puzzle every time, it has the replayability of any kind of logic puzzle game.
Yeah, I am looking forward to playing it more and understanding more about it. I do see a point down the road where I'm going to need some kind of expansion content or something like that, so I'm hoping that it is in the works. I don't know if it is, but I would really like to see more content that would make the game more variable. Talking about the value is really the last thing. This is a $45 MSRP, and realistically, I think you're paying for art and an app. Those are the biggest, costs in that. The game is good. It's good, solid value. Like we talked about the replayability. Hopefully you can get a good number of sessions out of it before you wear it out. You can find it as low as $32, quote unquote, on the internet, and I'll leave it at that. But I could, I would be okay with that price as well, somewhere in that range.
Yeah, $32 doesn't seem bad for this particular game, especially as pretty as it is. Mm-hmm. One thing we didn't actually talk about anywhere in this review, but I do want to mention, is that if you don't want to use the app, if for some reason either it's not working with your phone, or you don't like using apps, or you don't have a smartphone, or whatever, there is a way that you can play it with a person acting as the Game code master essentially. Very similar to how Alchemist has a thing where you can have a person being the secret keeper. Mm-hmm. So if you don't want to use the app, that is an option for you. Don't not get this game because you don't want to use the app.
So final thoughts, Danielle, what are you thinking?
I think this is an interesting game. It's not going to be for everyone because you really do need to be an Omni gamer to enjoy the luck-based mechanism that goes into this hard deduction puzzle. But if that sounds like something that might be interesting to you, particularly if you have one other person that you would regularly play this with, or if you're looking for a solo game, I think this could be a really interesting twist on a hard deduction game.
Okay.
It is not something I'm going to want to pull out every single time I get to the table, but it is going to be something that works really well for a quiet evening where maybe you want to play one game with another person, or maybe you're wrapping down the end of a game night and you want to have like a nice chill thinky game that's not necessarily going to be running around the table doing the funky chicken or whatever. I like it. It's not my favorite game that I've ever played, but I think it's a really good movement on the hard deduction theme.
I think that there's another space for Rising 5 that we haven't really talked about, and it's a space for people who aren't really deep into gaming, and especially people who haven't assigned themselves to, I'm a Euro gamer, I'm an Ameritrash, I'm a miniatures gamer. And I feel that I could play this game with family members who enjoy logic puzzles, Sudoku players, and are interested to see, okay, so what can modern board gaming do with a logic puzzle? I think having that foundation of the mastermind-style logic puzzle could be a good hook to bring people into that. And then you add in the gamification, you add in the objectives, you add in the little randomness with a die roll. There's excitement in that. But then, on top of those things, it's still cooperative, so you don't have to worry about the non-gamer being upset that, oh, well, you're just great at games, that's why you always beat me at this stuff. Because you get to do it together. That's a really great space for a game like this to exist. Alright, well that is Rising 5, Runes of Asteros. For more information on the beers we chose to pair with today's game on tap, check out the show notes section at our website, draftmechanic.net.
So I couldn't get enough about talking about Monster Match, so we had to put Monster Match on tap. We've got 5 different beers that go with the different types of monsters you might encounter, but also the scoring mechanism, because there's definitely one on here that I'm very surprised we have not talked about in an on tap yet.
All right. Well, I will lead us off with Indiana City Brewing Company from Indianapolis, Indiana, 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 and Indiana. This is a beer called Too Many Eyes, or Too Many Indianas, double dry hopped IPA that clocks in at 7.5% ABV. This is a beer that is dry hopped with Mosaic and newcomer to the scene Idaho 7 hops. I really like Idaho 7. That's got a really cool flavor to it. It was released in cans on March 3rd, so it might be still some floating around, and it's available in draft around town. This was a one-off batch, and it's actually, like, they have a group of artists that go to the brewery. I think it's like the third Thursday artists or something like that, and they do a collaborative art project, and now they've started to make beers based off of the collaborative art projects. So the label for this one, which is a label much different than the other stuff that Indiana City Brewing Company has done, is one of these art pieces. It is called Too Many Eyes, and there are way too many eyes on this label.
Well, not only that, but when you're playing Monster Match, if somebody rolls like 4 eyes, it's really easy to point to one that has 5 eyes, and you're like, oh, dang, no, too many eyes.
Too many eyes. I can't count that high.
Next up from Hobbs Tavern and Brewing Company in West Ossipee, New Hampshire, we have One Arm. It's a farmhouse ale that comes in at 6% ABV, 30 IBU, and it's a classic farmhouse-style ale with lemony, earthy, and spice flavors. This is available in cans at the brewery and in the surrounding area at bottle shops. And if you go to their website, they actually list their delivery spots so you can figure out where in the New Hampshire area they are at.
Also, if you go on their website, you can take a Google Maps, Google Street View tour of the inside of their entire facility.
Nice.
I walked all the way from the front porch all the way to the back hallway and then upstairs to the loft. And it looks like really nice. And I really kind of want to go there, but I can only go there on Google Maps. So
I mean, you're allowed to go to New Hampshire. There's not an
far.
injunction.
Okay, third up, from Sante Adarius Rustic Ales in Capitola, California. 4 Legs Good. It's a Belgian quad, 9.9% ABV. Now, this is a quote-unquote blonde quad. They fully admit that that's not a real style that they've invented, but it has a dry, full finish and a sneaky strength. It's available in bombers at the brewery.
I really like the name of this. I understand that it is an Animal Farm thing, but also, if you roll 4 and legs, 4 Legs Good.
4 Legs Good.
Next up from Evil Twin Brewing in Brooklyn, New York, we have Imperial Donut Break. This is an imperial stout that comes in at 11.5% ABV and 70 IBU.
Oof.
It's a coffee donut porter that came about when the head brewer stuffed whole donuts into a keg of Imperial Biscotti Break, which is one of their beers that they do a lot of variations on. And then he tapped it for a special event. It was bottled, and now it is actually regularly canned, and it is very available right now, which is something that I did not used to be. I'm very happy this is a regularly available canned product.
Mm-hmm. It is very good, but it is not my favorite donut-based beer. Fulfilling our non-contractual obligation to talk about Burial Beer Company in every episode of Draft Mechanic, we have, from Burial in Asheville, North Carolina, a beer called Skillet Donut Stout. This is an American stout, 8% ABV, 60 IBUs. This breakfast stout is made from a blend of 9 barley malts, a healthy scoop of oats, molasses, milk sugars, and our favorite blend of freshly roasted counterculture coffee beans. Now, it is only canned once or twice a year now, which is a big difference because they used to do this a lot more regularly, but it is freaking great, and one of our very favorite beers of all time.
Yeah, if you can get your hands on this, I was very surprised we had not found a way to put this on a list much sooner. But the only thing I found was when we were talking about our favorite beers of the year, you had mentioned it, and I think I probably had as well. So I'm glad that we could get this onto our Monster Match list. A great fun game for a great delicious beer.
All right, and if you want some information on any of those beers, including links to those websites, you can go to our website, draftmechanic.net, click on the show notes, and you will have the links. Cool.
Now, this past weekend, as of when this drops, was the first anniversary of Good Road Cider Works, which, if you listen to the beginning of the episode, is one of the locations that we do our monthly meetups at. And I really wanted to talk about cider at this point because I realized we had talked about all different kinds of beer, and we've been including ciders on the On Taps for quite a while, but I hadn't really talked about the history of cider. So in nod to Good Road, I wanted to give you guys a history of cider.
Hooray.
We have evidence of apple trees going back to like 1300 BC in the Nile region. Although we don't have evidence of them making cider from those apples, that's sort of agreed among historians of the first evidence of apple trees. When the Romans invaded England in 55 BC, the locals were already making a drink of fermented apple juice, and that's really the first reference that a lot of historians point to when they talk about people actually drinking hard cider, which is fermented apple juice, not to be confused with cider that a lot of Americans will consider just unfiltered apple juice that is often spiced. We're talking about hard cider here, so it has to be fermented. It's an alcoholic beverage, and it's usually a lot drier than that unfiltered apple juice. Drier meaning it has less sugar. When the Norman invasion happened in the 9th century in England, orchards were brought over that had new types of apples from the continent. So there were new types of orchards being planted in England. Now, the origins of cider in general are traced to England, France, and Spain. So this new cider that was being made in England had already been existing in France and in the Spanish regions. This was new to England, though, which is going to be important when I talk about how it came over to America a little bit later. One of the really interesting pieces of information I found actually has to do with the genome of apples. Because the genome of apples is really, really complex, it's got like 57,000 genes as opposed to a human, which has at most like 25,000 genes. There is a much greater variety between a parent tree and an offspring tree in regards to the type of apple. So where, like, if a person has a child, the child is probably going to look somewhat like the parent. If an apple produces a seed and from that seed you grow another tree, the apples of the offspring tree are not necessarily guaranteed to be anything like the apples of the parent tree because that genome is so much more complex and many different genes may be expressed in the fruit. Because of that, you weren't really guaranteed to get the same type of cider if you just worked off the seeds of the trees that you already had in your orchard. That's why a lot of times once orchard owners created a desirable cider, they would graft onto the roots of different stock so that they could continue the line from that tree without having to work through the seed. They would graft plant onto the rootstock so that you would get additional apples that tasted like that parent tree you were grafting from. You didn't have to worry about the genome. There are 4 different types of apple classifications when we talk about flavor. There is a sweet apple, which is low in tannins and low in acidity. There's a sharp apple, which is low in tannins and high in acidity. And then there are bittersweet and bitter sharp, which are high in tannins and either low or high in acidity, depending on whether you're talking about sweet or sharp. A lot of the time, cider is made from those bittersweet and bitter sharp apples, which is why it's not overwhelmingly cloyingly sweet. In addition to that, apples have far less sugar in them than grapes do. So when you ferment grape juice, you get wine, which is like, 10 to 15% alcohol a lot of the times. Apple cider is generally between 4 and 6% alcohol, and a lot of times, actually, there was a more watered-down, less alcoholic version that was called Applekin that was given to children, because at the time, and I know I've talked about this in at least one of our beer segments before, alcoholic beverages were a lot safer to drink than water, because water could carry all kinds of diseases, but the alcohol and the fermentation process that any kind of alcoholic beverage goes through actually made it a better bet to drink. You were less likely to die if you drank cider than if you drank water. Now, I promised you I would get to the history of cider in America. When the settlers came over to America, they had a really hard time growing the grain that was required to brew beer because the East Coast is not particularly amenable to grain plants. Apples, on the other hand, flourished in the New England environment. Like, if you go up to New England in the fall, there's apple orchards wherever you throw a stone. Like, you can't miss them. So they brought over these grafted plants from England, and they were able to plant those original varieties on the East Coast. In addition to that, you may have heard of Johnny Appleseed. This is a missionary named John Chapman who actually traveled west ahead of the settlers and would plant apple orchards, and these were actually meant to be cider orchards. But because it was part of his beliefs as a missionary that you had to grow apples from seeds because that's the way nature intended them. So these were not necessarily the grafted plants that were planted on the East Coast. They were from seed. So they were getting, like I said, you get a lot of different variation when you plant from seed as opposed to from grafted stock. These were much different flavors, and they were getting all kinds of new flavors that were unique to America. Now, those trees, once they grew up and John Chapman left, everybody grafted them and they could continue to produce those flavors again and again. But originally, they were very different from anything that had been produced otherwise. U.S. cider production was eventually slowed by a bunch of factors. First was the Industrial Revolution that moved people away from farms and to cities. So there were just less people to be tending orchards on their farms, and people were in cities where there weren't orchards existing, so they were moving to other types of beverages. That ties into the fact that you had a lot of immigrants coming over at that point from Germany and Central Europe, and they were really more drawn towards beer than towards apples. And at that point, we had settled farther into the center of the country, and the Midwest was much more amenable to that grain, so beer was able to be produced in larger numbers, and people were able to drink that throughout the entire country. Finally, the big nail in the coffin as far as U.S. cider production was Prohibition, which obviously slowed most alcohol production in the U.S., but in addition to cider not being legal to make or drink, a lot of the cider orchards were actually destroyed during Prohibition by particularly vehement prohibitionists. So when those orchards were replanted, they were replanted with apples that were more suitable for eating, which is why you've got a lot of apples that are meant for eating that are grown now and that are American grown. They are a lot sweeter, and that they're more that sweet and sharp variety as opposed to the bittersweet and bitter sharp. So you get stuff like Granny Smith apples, which are not necessarily as good for cider, but they're great if you just want to have them with like some peanut butter or give them to a teacher or whatever. So when those orchards were replanted, there was less stock with which to make apple cider. Apple cider is obviously showing a bit of a resurgence, as are a lot of the different beverages that were scaled back during Prohibition and when the American alcohol taste sort of narrowed down to one type of beer and liquor. So it's interesting to see a lot of cider works popping up as well as craft breweries. I mean, we've got at least 2 cider works just in Charlotte, and I know there are several other in North Carolina. So if you are looking for something that is a craft-produced alcoholic beverage, you want to support local craft-produced beverages, but maybe beer isn't your thing, or you haven't found what type of beer is your thing yet, cider is a great way to go, and your local cider is probably going to have a wide variety of stuff that you can try to find what is exactly the type of cider that you like. Maybe you like sweet, maybe you like a more dry cider. You'll be able to find out.
All right. Well, happy birthday, Good Road Cider Works. We loves ya.
A draftmechanic.net a day keeps the doctor away. That's what I always say.
Good, that leaves more apples left for cidering.
Indeed it does.
In our final round today, we have asked our Slack channel what constitutes a modern classic. This is a discussion topic that came up after I saw Asmodee's Modern Classics line that we talked about at the very top of the show. I told you we'd come back around to it, and here we are.
Man of your word.
Back around to it. So once again, the Asmodee Modern Classics line included Ticket to Ride Europe, Catan, Carcassonne, Dixit, Pandemic, and Splendor. Danielle, you want to start us off with some of these responses?
Sure. Patrick Hillier said, "A modern classic is a game with a long life potential, and that I'll be happy to play over and over for years to come. Therefore, it had to have a few years and a few plays under its belt. Plenty of games are a flash, and then a year later they're forgotten. The modern classics are the ones we are still playing later. My classics are often 20 to 30-year-old games, so modern is a relative term. I did a search for games 10 years old or less that I've played several times, enough so I could rate them. My six-pack includes Suburbia from 2012, Kinkopolis from 2012, Lords of Waterdeep also from 2012, Flashpoint Fire Rescue from 2011, Lords of Vegas from 2010, and Cyclades from 2009.
Paul Imbeden from Split Second Games jumped onto that channel right there and said, "I'm going to echo what Patrick just said. Each of those games has been a part of my library for at least 10 years and is in no danger of leaving." He also includes his six-pack, which was Battlestar Galactica, Galaxy Trucker, Pandemic, Codenames Cosmic Encounter, and Coloretto. Codenames. That's the one that I'm thinking is the one that will become the modern classic. And I feel like as we get more and more years away from it, there's 3 versions of it on the shelf at Target right now. That's incredible for a game that is so new, and I bet is going to have huge staying power.
Yeah, I mean, and there's 2 licensed versions, another one or 2 coming up soon. I mean,
Deep Undercover as well.
Oh, I hadn't even thought of that. I was thinking of the Harry Potter and Munchkin ones.
There's so many. There's so many versions of Codenames.
BJ from Board Game Gumbo says, "At our first ever dedicated board gaming con, there were a lot of new gamers. And by and large, all of them referenced Catan as one of the games that got them into the hobby. So I had arbitrarily defined modern classic as games since 1995, the year Catan was introduced. My choices for modern classics would be Ticket to Ride, Viticulture, Pandemic, Carcassonne, No Thanks, and Puerto Rico."
Okay. Dennis Hoyle responded to that and says, "I think post-Catan is a good marker for the beginning, but I think a game needs to be at least 10 years old to be considered a classic." In response to BJ's list, he'd swap out Viticulture with Catan, and he thinks it's a very strong six-pack. And for me personally, I'd replace No Thanks with Bonanza, he says. I don't really think about Bonanza in that particular kind of vein, but I guess it does kind of make sense.
Yeah, we've been playing it a lot more recently, and it's shined every time. Shown every time that we've gotten it to the table. I've really been enjoying the plays of it. Mm-hmm. Wolf Boy says, "So how to define a modern classic? The hidden attribute in my head is maybe answering this question. When I'm old and kids come to my retirement home to hang out with the old bald dude, what would I still want to play 40 years from now? Some of my six-pack fall into semi-abstract games such as TAC, Splendor, Sagrada, Raiders of the North Sea, Codenames, Seven Ronin, and maybe Lanterns."
I want to focus in on a few that he brought up there, because I feel like games like Lanterns, Sagrada, if they had been released 10 years ago, would they be modern classics now? Is the fact that it's a more crowded landscape now going to make some of these games that are like really freaking strong and really fun and great and easy to, super accessible and great themes, are they almost crowded out of that kind of conversation because there are so many games now?
I kind of think of it in the inverse, where games that brought in new mechanics but maybe didn't bring them in the most engaging and really well done way are considered classics because they were the first to do it and they were really the only ones that were available at the time.
Okay.
One of the ones that you and I were talking about when we were just looking at what type of games were not part of that Asmodee list was there were no deck builders on that list. So we were thinking about Dominion, and Dominion's not the deck builder I want to play if I'm going to bring up a deck builder, but it was the first deck builder by most accounts, and it was the one that was really readily available to people for a long time, so it is considered, sort of a pinnacle of that style, even though there are games that are newer than it that maybe do deck building better or more to one's taste. So I have a feeling it's less, or I see it less as the new games are getting crowded out, as opposed to old games maybe didn't get crowded out, and because there wasn't as much competition, they were able to hang on longer than they might have otherwise.
Okay, I see where you're going there. There's also kind of a hole in that chunk of any kind of abstract strategy games. I wonder if something from the Gift series would be appropriate. I've never played any of them, but I know that they are very well regarded. And you've got games like The Duke or Hive that were kind of those abstract games that were earlier this decade that had that kind of thing going for them. And I'm kind of wondering, when does Santorini become eligible? Because that is the kind of game that I would pick as a modern classic if I were to think about my grouping of games right now. It's a game that has, again, simplicity to teach, great replayability, and really, really caught on like wildfire when it was first released. And obviously you can find it at not Toys R Us anymore, but you can find it at Target and some other, big box stores right now as a game that it's super available. I'm hoping that game sticks around and has that kind of impact on the board game community at large.
Another type of game that wasn't included in the Modern Classics line that we were discussing what might be an example of that is a modern classic is worker placement. You had suggested perhaps Kalos would be, or Stone Age. I had thought maybe Lords of Waterdeep, Agricola, or even maybe Caverna, although I would probably put Agricola over Caverna if you're talking about the one that is the classic.
I think Lords of Waterdeep is going to be, at least that's the one that, I hear people say, oh, that's the worker placement game. If you ever played worker placement, it's like Lords of Waterdeep, where you're sending your workers all over to do stuff. I wouldn't be surprised if the Modern Classics line expands, that they do include Lords of Waterdeep at some point. That kind of seems like the kind of game that would be a thing that they would do.
Yeah, I don't think Agricola is quite at the gateway level that they were necessarily gunning for with, Ticket to Ride Europe or something like that. But Lords of Waterdeep would certainly fit into that weight.
I think it's really surprising that there was no mention of Seven Wonders in that grouping as well, because I, again, think of that as one of those games that's just had a massive impact. That is the game that a lot of people came in to learn about drafting at a gateway level, and it's a game that's had a lot of staying power, obviously, a number of expansions and another one on the way. It spawned Seven Wonders Duel, which was very popular as well, and I am honestly kind of surprised to see that not in that grouping. It's probably the one that I would have expected. Obviously, I'm going to pick among the stars myself if I'm picking the modern classic of drafting games, because that is my personal prerogative.
I'm pretty sure Asmodee is still selling Seven Wonders without the modern classic denotation on it.
And it's not even like it's, the game's too new, because you've got Splendor in that grouping as well, which is a game that that's the only one I feel like you could argue as being a modern classic, but at the same time, Splendor is probably one of the most popular games that's been released in the last few years, at least in terms of just straight pushing units, I would assume.
Right, but it is relatively new. I wouldn't be surprised if Splendor was in there to sort of combat the people who are buying Century instead of Splendor at this point as well.
Oh, that's a very good point. I hadn't thought about that.
The other thing that we talked about that we both had said we kind of felt was a modern classic, but didn't really fit into it in the way that we were sort of breaking down categories and picking representations of a category, was Race for the Galaxy, which was obviously not the first game to do action selection with the cards. That way San Juan had come out a couple of years before, but it has been really well supported, and it's a great game. Anybody who plays it regularly and knows how to play it, I've never heard somebody who is comfortable playing Race for the Galaxy say they don't like it. Now, maybe that's just me selecting the people I'm listening to, because I really like Race for the Galaxy, but I think it is generally really well received and fits into that point where you could take a new game player, and realistically, obviously the iconography is the hardest part of teaching Race for the Galaxy to anyone, whether they're a new gamer or not, but once you get them through that iconography, the game itself is not terribly complicated.
I would personally put that into my selection of modern classics. So I had said a little while ago, I think Santorini is a super recent game that could be thought of as a modern classic. What would you pick as a game from the last 2 years you think has the potential to someday be thought of as a modern classic like that?
Probably Sagrada.
Okay.
It is really neat the way the dice placement works. The way the rule set is so incredibly simple to explain. You take this, you put it in a space where it doesn't touch anything that's the same. Mm-hmm. But there is so much thinking that goes into what you're taking and when you're taking it, and what options you are leaving available to yourself and what options you are closing off. When is the right time to use those tool cards, and when it's better to just save the points for the end of the game. There's so much deep thinking that goes into a very, very simple game that I think that is the kind of game that has the potential to become a classic. Also, the fact that it is very, very pretty on a table does not hurt.
Yeah, as you were saying that, I kind of was thinking about both that and Santorini as games that are both thought of in terms of, that simple teach, but they also are not mainstays, but they're great representations of what the board game hobby is doing now in terms of this game could be simple, but we're going to make it look and feel exceptional. Both of those games are super tactile. They're very well made, great components, great table presence for both. Sagrada has gorgeous full color art. And full color design everywhere on the boards, and Santorini, of course, has the pedestal and all of the sharp white pieces of the buildings and those great blue tops that make it look like the source material. And I feel like that might be another thing we can think about moving forward, is that the era that we're in now is doing such amazing things with making games feel more than just this game. That might be a new thing that we look at as a criteria for a modern classic.
I mean, even in our discussion of Rising 5 before, we sort of glossed over it at the beginning of the idea, but that game is absolutely gorgeous. For what is essentially 6 action spaces and some room to put some chits on a board, It is made to look absolutely amazing. And I think in this era of board gaming, to become a classic like that, having a beautiful presentation doesn't so much boost you up, but it allows you into the contest.
Yeah. Crowded marketplace, you got to stand out. Well, if you have any thoughts that you want to share on this, absolutely we encourage you to either visit our show notes at draftmechanic.net, or you can come and join our Slack channel, draftmechanic.net/Slack. It's free. You can come and talk with us and all of the other Draft Mechanic listeners that have signed up. But I think that's pretty much bringing us to the end of this episode. So, as always, you can look to draftmechanic.net or find us on social media at draftmechanic on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. You can send us an email at draftmechanic@gmail.com if you're so inclined.
We've also got a Board Game Geek Guild. That is guild number 2470. That's another place you can let us know if you have opinions on what we were just talking about. There will be a thread for this episode. If you are in the Charlotte, North Carolina area on May 3rd, come down to Good Road Cider Works and try some of those delicious ciders I was talking about. Come out, play some games, have a great time.
Draft Mechanic is sponsored by Gray Fox Games. Visit grayfoxgames.com and sign up for their newsletter for the latest. Gray Fox Games, quality games, cleverly crafted. All right. Nope, that's pretty much it. Wait, Danielle, do you have anything else you want to say?
As always, I would like to remind our listeners to please game responsibly and tell them that I'll see them back here in 2 weeks for another round.
All right, good night.
Night.
Draft Mechanic episode 73 was recorded on Sunday, April 22nd, 2018 in front of a live studio cat.
Beauty is in your eyes, you are the beholder. You render me stricken. Do not go gently into that gutter line.
Hey out there in podcast land, this is Brian, and I just wanted to invite you to check out my tabletop game review and preview video channel, Cloak and Maple. There, I check out a lot of Kickstarter games, as well as sneak in some fresh reviews of published games. Come and check out all of the bad acting in my attempts to be entertaining in my intros. Stay for a game overview and hear my thoughts of the game at the very end. You can find Cloak and Meeple on YouTube at youtube.com/cloakandmeeple.
Punchboard Media, where we all
bring something
to the table.
pull up a chair
At punchboardmedia.com.